a nuclear-armed nation of 240 million people, an air force that boasts it knocked enemy fighter jets out of the sky, and a national treasury that just a couple of years ago came within 3 weeks of running out of the money it needed to keep feeding its own citizens. This is Pakistan. On paper, one of the largest militaries on Earth, sitting on an arsenal of atomic weapons. In reality, a country where nearly 70 million people have been pushed below the poverty line, where the government hands over most of what it collects in taxes just to pay interest on old debt, and where the state has gone to the same international lender for a rescue package 25 separate times since it was born. So how does a country manage to build nuclear bombs but struggle to pay for imported cooking oil and medicine? How does an army that squares up to India keep losing men and territory to insurgents inside its own borders? And why, after decades of bailouts and promises, is Pakistan still trapped in almost exactly the same cycle it swore every single time that it would finally escape? This is the story of how a nation with enormous potential ended up here. Before we get into it, if you enjoy deep dives like this one, take a second to subscribe. Every week I break down a collapsing economy or a failing state piece by piece, and there's a lot more coming that you will not want to miss. Now, let us go back to the beginning. When Pakistan was carved out of British India in 1947, it was supposed to be a homeland built on hope. It had fertile farmland, a young and growing population, a coastline in the perfect spot for global trade, and a strategic position that made it valuable to every major power on the map. In its early decades, there were even moments when economists pointed to Pakistan as a country to watch, a place that might race ahead of its neighbors. That is not the story that unfolded. Instead, Pakistan became a case study in something else entirely: how a state can borrow its way from one crisis to the next, until borrowing itself becomes the only thing holding the country together. To understand the collapse, you have to understand the debt machine. Pakistan joined the International Monetary Fund in 1950, and over the years that followed, it kept coming back. Not once, not twice, 25 separate arrangements. Think about what that actually means. It means that for most of its existence, this country has been living on financial life support, lurching from bailout to bailout, agreeing to painful conditions, and then slipping right back into the same hole a few years later. Each rescue followed the same pattern. Reserves would run dangerously low. The currency would start to slide. Panic would spread through the markets. Then Pakistan would fly negotiators to Washington, agree to raise taxes, cut subsidies, and hike the price of electricity and fuel, and in exchange, it would receive just enough money to avoid disaster. The crisis would ease for a while. And then, because the deeper problems were never fixed, it would come roaring back. What are those deeper problems? Start with taxes. For decades, Pakistan has run on a tax system where only a narrow slice of the population and the economy actually pays. Huge sectors operate completely outside the tax net. That leaves the government permanently short of revenue, which means it borrows to cover the gap, which means the debt grows, which means the interest payments grow, which eats even more of the budget. It is a trap, and it tightens every year. Then there is trade. Pakistan buys far more from the world than it sells to it. In one recent year, the country imported roughly $70 billion in goods and services while exporting only around $41 billion. That is a gap of nearly $30 billion every year that has to be filled from somewhere. For a long time, the thing filling it has been remittances, the money sent home by millions of Pakistanis working abroad, especially in the Gulf. Those workers sent back a record $38 billion, and that money has quietly been one of the only things keeping the whole system from tipping over. Sit with that for a moment. A nation of this size, with this much land and this many people, is being held upright in large part by its own citizens leaving to work somewhere else and mailing their wages home. There is a third structural wound, and it runs right through the wires and pipes that power the country: energy. For years, Pakistan has been strangled by what economists call circular debt, a tangle of unpaid bills that stretches from consumers who cannot pay, to distributors who cannot collect, to power producers who cannot recover their costs, to a government that keeps promising to cover the difference and keeps falling behind. The result is a system where electricity is somehow both punishingly expensive and maddeningly unreliable. Families pay some of the highest power bills in the region, and still, the lights go out for hours. Businesses that might have hired and exported instead sit idle during blackouts, unable to run their machines. An economy cannot grow when it cannot keep the power on, and Pakistan has spent years unable to solve a problem that quietly drains it from the inside. For years, this was manageable, barely. Then came the perfect storm. The pandemic hit, and the government spent money it did not really have. A global energy shortage sent fuel prices soaring, and in 2022, catastrophic floods swallowed a third of the country, destroying crops, homes, roads, and lives, and blowing a massive hole in an economy that had no cushion left to absorb it. By late 2022 and into 2023, the wheels came off. The rupee lost more than half of its value against the dollar in the space of just 2 years. Inflation exploded. In January 2023, prices were rising at more than 27% compared to the year before, the highest reading since 1975. By the middle of that year, inflation would peak at a brutal 38%. Now think about what those numbers mean in a kitchen, not a spreadsheet. 38% inflation means the flour, the rice, the oil, the fuel that a family bought last year now costs dramatically more, while wages stay frozen. It means parents skipping meals so their children can eat. It means medicine becoming a luxury. And in the worst months, it meant something even darker. As the price of flour spiraled, huge crowds gathered at subsidized distribution points, desperate for a sack they could actually afford. In the crush of those crowds, people were trampled. Human beings died, not in a war or a disaster, but in a stampede for bread. That is what a currency losing its value does at the very bottom of society. It turns the simple act of feeding a family into something people are willing to risk their lives for. For the young, the outlook is its own kind of crisis. Pakistan produces millions of new job seekers every year, far more than its stalled economy can absorb. A generation of graduates finds itself educated, connected, and stuck, watching a system that seems to have no place for them. Some channel that frustration into politics. Many simply plan their exit, and it nearly got much worse. At the low point, Pakistan's foreign reserves fell to under $4 billion. That was enough to cover only about 3 weeks of imports. 3 weeks. The state bank stopped issuing letters of credit for anything except essential food and medicine. Thousands of shipping containers piled up at the port in Karachi, stuffed with goods the country could no longer afford to pay for. Factories slowed, textile plants, the backbone of Pakistan's exports, partially shut down. Public construction froze. This is what standing on the edge of national bankruptcy looks like. Not a single dramatic explosion, but a slow strangulation, where a country simply runs out of the ability to buy what it needs from the outside world. And every one of these shocks lands twice. Once on the government, which scrambles to find dollars, and once on the citizen, who watches the rupee in their pocket buy less and less each month. When a currency loses half its value, savings evaporate. The money a family carefully set aside for a wedding, a surgery, a small business, suddenly buys half of what it used to. There is no vote on this, no warning, no appeal. It simply happens quietly to millions of people at once, and it is one of the cruelest taxes a broken economy can impose. Pakistan avoided going over the cliff the only way it knew how. It went back to the IMF, agreed to another program, swallowed another round of austerity, and secured just enough to stay afloat. By 2024, a new extended fund facility was in place. By December of 2025, the fund dispersed another $1.2 billion, and the program was set to continue into 2027. On the surface, that looks like recovery. And in the narrowest sense, some things did stabilize. By late 2025, inflation had cooled back into single digits. Reserves had climbed back to around $21 billion. The stock market rallied. The government even managed a small primary surplus, meaning that before counting interest payments, it was finally taking in a little more than it spent. For a country that had been staring into the abyss, these were real signs of life. But here is where the deeper tragedy comes into focus, because stabilization is not the same as escape. Look past the headline numbers, and the picture is grim. In the 2025 to 2026 economic survey, the government's own data showed that the poverty rate had climbed from around 22% in 2018 to nearly 29%. That single shift means roughly 27 million additional people fell below the poverty line, bringing the total to nearly 70 million human beings living in poverty. Balochistan and the rural areas were hit hardest. Income inequality widened, so even as the spreadsheets improved, the lives behind them got worse. Growth in the 2026 fiscal year came in at 3.7%. That sounds decent until you remember that Pakistan's population is growing so fast that this barely keeps the country ahead of its own baby boom. There are more mouths to feed every year, and the economy is only just outrunning them. That is not a recovery. That is a treadmill. One analyst described Pakistan's situation with a phrase that lands hard. Not hell, they wrote, but certainly not heaven. Economic purgatory. A country that manages to avoid outright collapse, yet never breaks free to actually grow. Living standards inch forward. Jobs stay scarce, and the most educated, most ambitious young Pakistanis keep doing the rational thing. They leave. The brain drain never stops because for a talented graduate, opportunity lives almost anywhere but home. And the debt at the center of it all keeps growing. By early 2026, Pakistan's total public debt had climbed past 83 trillion rupees, split between what it owes at home and a mountain of external liabilities owed abroad. Servicing that debt still devours an enormous share of every rupee the government collects. The country is running just to stand still, and the finish line keeps moving further away. Now, you cannot tell the story of Pakistan's economy without talking about the institution that sits at the very center of the state, above the politicians, above the courts, and in many ways, above the economy itself. The military. In most countries, the army answers to the government. In Pakistan, it has often been the other way around. The military has ruled directly through coups, and when it has not ruled directly, it has loomed over every civilian leader, deciding who rises and who falls. It runs sprawling business empires, controls vast amounts of land, and holds a grip on foreign policy that no elected official can loosen. To grasp how deep this goes, look at what the military actually owns. Over the decades, the armed forces have built a commercial empire that reaches into almost every corner of the economy. Foundations and welfare trusts tied to the military run banks, cement plants, fertilizer factories, cereal brands, real estate developments, and more. The army is not just a fighting force in Pakistan. It is one of the largest business conglomerates in the entire country. That means the institution meant to defend the state also has enormous financial interests woven into it. And untangling the economy from the generals is not simply a matter of policy. It is a matter of power, and power does not give itself up easily. You saw that grip on full display with Imran Khan. The former cricket superstar swept into power promising to break the old order and clean up corruption. But when he fell out with the powerful generals, his government was pushed out in 2022 through a no-confidence vote. He was later arrested and jailed. The elections that followed in 2024 were clouded by widespread allegations of rigging and, once again, of the military tipping the scales. For a nation drowning in economic pain, this political chaos was gasoline on the fire. Investors want stability. Pakistan kept delivering turmoil. And here is the uncomfortable irony. The military consumes an enormous share of the national budget, justified by the eternal standoff with India. Yet when that standoff finally turned into open fighting, the results raised hard questions on every side. In April of 2025, gunmen killed 26 civilians, most of them tourists, in Pahalgam in Indian-administered Kashmir. India blamed groups it says operate from Pakistani soil. Pakistan denied involvement. And then, in the early hours of May 7, 2025, India launched Operation Sindoor, striking targets it described as terrorist camps deep inside Pakistani territory, including in the heavily populated province of Punjab. These were the deepest strikes India had carried out inside Pakistan since the War of 1971. What followed were roughly 4 days of the most serious fighting between these two nuclear-armed rivals in decades. Fighter jets, drones, missiles, and a flood of competing claims and disinformation. And this is where you have to be careful, because both sides tell very different stories. Pakistan's Air Force claimed a stunning defensive victory. It said it shot down multiple Indian jets in the opening hours. And in the months that followed, Pakistani officials raised that number, eventually claiming as many as 8 aircraft downed, including advanced French-built Rafales, while insisting Pakistan itself lost nothing. India told a different tale. Indian commanders acknowledged that, yes, some aircraft were lost in the early fighting, but they firmly disputed Pakistan's numbers, and they pointed to what came later. On the 9th and 10th of May, India launched a sophisticated wave of decoy drones and precision cruise missiles that, by many independent accounts, punched through Pakistan's air defenses and struck military targets across the country. Analysts studying the crisis afterward concluded that Pakistan likely did down several Indian planes early on, with independent investigators finding evidence of a few crash sites. But they also concluded that by the final days, India had imposed costs Pakistan could not match or answer, before the whole thing was halted by a ceasefire brokered with heavy American involvement. So who won? Both governments declared victory, which tells you something in itself. But strip away the propaganda, and the deeper lesson for Pakistan was sobering. A military that eats up so much of a struggling nation's resources found itself in a fight where it could take a punch, but where the strategic momentum, by the end, was not on its side. And hanging over the entire confrontation was the fact that both of these countries possessed nuclear weapons. For 4 tense days, the world watched 2 nuclear-armed neighbors trade blows and wondered how close the ladder of escalation might climb. That is the shadow Pakistan lives under permanently. Its rivalry with India is not just expensive in rupees. It is a rivalry where a single miscalculation carries consequences almost too large to imagine, which is exactly why so many outside powers scrambled so quickly to force a ceasefire before things spiraled further. And it dragged an economy already on its knees to the very edge of a wider war it absolutely could not afford. Because here is the thing the parades and the press conferences do not show you. Pakistan's most dangerous battles are not on the border with India at all. They are inside. Turn to the southwest, to Balochistan, the country's largest province by land and its poorest by almost every measure. It is rich in gas and minerals, yet the people who live there have long felt that their resources are pumped out to benefit everyone but them. Out of that grievance grew a fierce separatist insurgency, led by groups like the Baloch Liberation Army that has waged war against the Pakistani state for years. And this insurgency has grown bolder. In March of 2025, separatist fighters did something that stunned the country. They hijacked the Jafar Express, a train carrying more than 400 passengers traveling from Quetta toward Peshawar. In the chaos and the operation to retake it, more than 30 people were killed. Across 2025, more than 200 people, most of them members of the security forces, were killed in Balochistan and the neighboring province. Then it escalated again. In early 2026, a wave of coordinated attacks tore across multiple districts of Balochistan at once. By the government's own account, the fighting left more than 200 militants and more than 20 members of the security forces dead, along with dozens of civilians. Whole regions became battlegrounds. The violence was serious enough to draw condemnation from around the world, including from China, which has poured tens of billions of dollars into the province and has its own people and projects to protect. And that points to another layer of this story: China. Through the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, Beijing has invested enormous sums into Pakistani roads, power plants, and above all, the deep water port at Gwadar in Balochistan. For Pakistan, Chinese money has been a lifeline, but it has also deepened the country's dependence, tied its fate to a single powerful patron, and painted a giant target on those projects for the very insurgents who resent them most. Chinese workers have been attacked. Convoys have been bombed. The corridor that was sold as Pakistan's path to prosperity now needs its own small army to protect it. There is a harder question buried in this relationship, one Pakistanis increasingly ask out loud. When you borrow this heavily from a single giant, and much of that borrowing is locked into expensive projects on terms you did not fully control, are you building your future or mortgaging it? Some of the power plants built under the corridor added to the very energy costs crushing ordinary consumers. Some of the loans added to the debt pile that austerity is now trying to shrink. Chinese investment kept Pakistan moving when few others would lend, and for that, Islamabad is grateful. But gratitude and dependence are uncomfortable neighbors. And Pakistan now finds itself needing to please its lender, protect its projects, and answer to its own angry citizens, all at the same time. And in the northwest, along the border with Afghanistan, the state faces yet another front. Militant groups have surged back, launching relentless attacks on soldiers and police. An army built and funded to fight a conventional war against India finds itself bleeding, week after week, in a grinding internal conflict against enemies who melt back into the mountains. Relations with Afghanistan soured as Pakistan accused its neighbor of sheltering the fighters crossing the border to attack it. A bitter turn for a state that once believed it could manage the very forces now turning against it. The soldiers dying in these remote outposts rarely make the front pages, but their deaths, week after week, are a quiet indictment of a security strategy that spent decades fixated on one enemy while others grew in the shadows. Step back and look at the whole picture, and a pattern emerges. This is not the story of one bad year, or one bad government, or one lost battle. It is the story of a state stretched dangerously thin across too many fronts at once, an economy kept alive by loans it can never fully repay, a political system where the men in uniform, not the men at the ballot box, hold the real power, a treasury bled by interest payments, and a military bled by insurgencies. And underneath all of it, tens of millions of ordinary people paying the price for decisions they never got to make. And notice how the fronts feed each other. A weak economy cannot fund the development that might calm places like Balochistan. So the grievances deepen and the fighting spreads, which scares off the investment the economy desperately needs, which keeps it weak. A military that dominates politics unsettles the stability investors crave, which keeps growth low, which keeps the country leaning on that very military to hold things together. Everywhere you look, the problems are not separate. They are locked together, each one feeding the next, which is exactly what makes this cycle so brutally hard to break. The tragedy is that none of this was inevitable. Pakistan has extraordinary assets, a young population bursting with talent and energy, a diaspora that sends home tens of billions of dollars a year and would send more if there were something to invest in, a strategic location that half the world wants access to. Farmland, minerals, coastline, ports. On paper, the ingredients for a rising power are all there. What is missing is not resources. It is the willingness to do the hard, unglamorous things that would actually break the cycle. Widen the tax base so the wealthy and the powerful finally pay their share. Rein in the military's grip on politics and the economy. Invest in exports and industry instead of borrowing to import. Give the young and the ambitious a reason to stay instead of a runway to leave. Every honest economist who looks at Pakistan says roughly the same thing. The path out exists. The country just keeps choosing not to take it. And so it stays where it is. Not in a fiery collapse, but in that grinding purgatory. Stable enough to avoid the headlines that scream bankruptcy, broken enough that 70 million of its people live in poverty and its brightest keep boarding planes out. Powerful enough to build a bomb, fragile enough to lose ground to insurgents at home. Whether Pakistan finally breaks the cycle or simply survives to face the next crisis a few years from now is the question hanging over 240 million lives. History suggests the pattern will repeat. It has stood at this exact spot before, made these exact promises, and slid back down that very same slope more times than anyone would care to count. But history is not a prophecy. It is a warning. And somewhere in that warning is the faint, stubborn possibility of a different ending, if the country can ever find the courage to write it. If you found this breakdown worth your time, the video on your screen right now goes even deeper into how nations rise, break, and sometimes claw their way back. Go watch it next.